On today's episode, the early days of Boston's rap culture. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. So today I have an exciting video for you guys. Shout out to Hassan Burton. I hope I'm saying your name right. He's requested this video several times and has been waiting patiently for it. Since a lot of other viewers have been asking me to make hip-hop or rap content, I figured that people would want to see this video. It's awesome that people will watch videos that I make about rap. It's something that I've always wanted to be part of this channel. I'm a hip-hop head and a rap fan to the fullest since I was a little kid. In this video, we'll go way back to the beginning of hip-hop and the Bean. Like everything else from outside the region, people think that there's no early rap scene in Boston or that the city didn't contribute in any meaningful way to hip-hop, which of course couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, it's undeniable that rap began in New York City, the South Bronx to be exact. Other large US cities like LA have made their contributions with groups like NWA, whose members Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, and to a smaller extent Eazy-E would go on to have successful solo careers. The West Coast had their own signature sound that changed the course of rap's trajectory in the early 90s, and it also contributed to a huge rivalry between the East and West Coasts. After the turn of the millennia, the South, especially Atlanta, has become a hub for the rap industry. Many young aspiring rappers travel from their home cities to Atlanta for their chance to make it big in the industry. Atlanta, with artists like Gucci Mane, T.I., Young Jeezy, was the birthplace of the trap genre. And then there's Chicago, which is where today's most popular form of rap, aka drill, hails from. Drill, which is considered by a lot of people to be very toxic for its subject matter, is by far the most popular type of rap today, especially with the younger generations. While there is a thriving drill scene in the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts currently, that's not what I'll be discussing in this video, but I will be in future content. Although no major genre of rap or hip-hop was created in Boston, that doesn't mean the city didn't contribute to the evolution of the craft. Going all the way back to the very early days of hip-hop, Boston was in the loop. One of the early New York hip-hop groups, Africa Bambaataa, released the breakdancing classic Planet Rock. Breakdancing was a big part of early hip-hop culture. DJs would spin records at block parties or in clubs. The DJs would continue to loop in the instrumental breaks in the records while teenagers and young adults would do their things on the dance floor. Planet Rock was one of the first real big breakdancing songs to go mainstream. Arthur Baker, who had gained notoriety for being a DJ at Boston clubs, was introduced to Africa Bambaataa and was a producer on the 1982 hit track. Before hip-hop came to the city, Boston was known for funk. In the late 70s and early 80s, most clubs in the city spun similar electro-type funk highlighted with synthesizers. If you listen to early Boston rap, you can hear a lot of that influence in the instrumentals and samples. Apparently, rappers from other cities sought out Boston producers when they were looking to emulate that funky Boston sound. I've read that around sometime in 1979, the first rap mixtapes started to circulate around the city. They were basically just DJ jams, spinning records, and some had MCs battling over breakbeats. When kids in Boston neighborhoods first got a hold of these mixtapes coming north from New York City, they loved it. I'm sure a lot of people thought that hip-hop or rap would just be another passing musical trend, but now almost 50 years later, it's clear that the genre is here to stay. I'm just going to briefly touch on this for people who aren't that familiar with my content or the city of Boston. I think one of the biggest misconceptions with Boston and its rap scene is the same misconception that people have of the city in general. People from outside the area tend to view Boston as a white, mostly Irish city, more so in the 80s and 90s than today. That, of course, is not true. There are many different white ethnic groups besides Irish, and in the 1980s, 20% of the city's overall population was black. That's roughly over 100,000 citizens. So even though Boston might have been viewed differently from the outside, its inner city neighborhoods were demographically mixed. Boston has always had a large, vibrant African American population, even if that's not a well-known fact outside of the region. I just had to point that out before going on with this video, because that's just a general misconception about the city of Boston, which is incorrect. Now, with that being said, it is true that Boston was one of the most segregated northern cities in the United States. Then to further compound that, there were decades of forced integration in the city's schools. Starting in 1974, black children were being bused into white school districts, and vice versa, white children were being bused into black school districts. This certainly didn't help any racial tensions that still existed in the city after the race riots of 1967. Boston unfortunately gained a reputation as a racist city throughout the 20th century. The city's disdain for early hip hop did little to change Boston's reputation. It would seem that throughout the 1980s, the city did not want to grant permits for any rap stars looking to perform at one of the city's larger venues. While rock and roll bands were playing at Boston Garden, early rap groups were performing at rec centers, school gymnasiums, or cafeterias, or in parks. Queen Latifah, for example, did a performance at the Chez Vous roller skating rink in the 1980s. Daryl Whiting, aka God, who hailed from Queens, New York, set up shop with his New York boys in the Orchard Park projects in the 1980s. With the proceeds from their vast narcotics trade, Whiting bought many properties and businesses in the Roxbury area. One such place was the Crown Social Hall on Geneva Ave, just off Blue Hill Ave. Besides serving as a community center, it was also one of the few spaces in the city that could hold a somewhat large rap audience. Queen Latifah also performed there, as well as EPMD. Shout out Eric Sermon and Parrish Smith. You Got to Chill was one of my favorite early rap songs. Poor Righteous Teachers also performed there as well. It wasn't just the venues, the city of Boston wasn't looking to support this hip hop trend in general. In the early days, there was virtually no radio support whatsoever. The only way people heard most rap, especially local rappers, was on mixtapes or hearing them at a party, or if a local DJ played their record at a club. One of the first big Boston clubs to allow hip hop acts was The Channel. Cool G opened for a few national artists there. Once hip hop started making it into the mainstream, most large US cities started trying to develop their own sound to rival New York and LA. Cities like Houston, Memphis, Oakland, and Philly were developing their own sounds. Boston was no different. One of the early rap groups to become known in the city and to a certain extent beyond were Cool G and the TDS Mob. This setup was unique from the jump. Most hip hop groups showcased one DJ and two or more MCs. TDS Mob was two DJs, DJ Devastation or Devastator or DBC, and DJ Treacherous or simply Michael K. The group's MC was Cool G, not to be confused with Cool G Rap from New York. Cool G hailed from the notorious Lenox housing projects in Boston. Lenox is one of the most well-known housing projects in the city, and during the late 80s and early 90s was an incredibly active place. Cool G talks about it in an interview. He addresses the fact that he's from Lenox and all the stuff that went on there, but says he doesn't put it in his music because to him, it's nothing to glorify. Now, I found this very interesting because most rap from that period in the late 80s when all this stuff was at its peak is very rarely rapped about. It was later rappers like Jay-Z or 50 Cent that made their careers talking about this lifestyle. There's a really good book called Queen's Reign Supreme that speaks on how 50 Cent raps about the exploits of guys from a generation before him like Fat Cat Nichols or Supreme. Guys from the actual generation who lived it didn't see it as something to glorify. Cool G said he was around the life. All the hustlers in the South End and in Roxbury said were the real deal. They wore real gold and jewels, but it wasn't something that he wanted to glorify in his music. Cool G's raps are very socially conscious and raw. He was doing reality rap before it was a thing. His track, The Rhyme You're About to Hear Is True, or The Rap You're About to Hear Is True, depending on where you find it, is a gritty view into his daily life living in the Lenox projects in the 1980s. The TDS Mob's track, What This World Is Coming To, is probably just as much or more relevant today than it was released in the 1980s. As Cool G delivers his raw lyrics describing a dude just chilling on his lunch break being harassed by cops for doing nothing wrong over the hard beat looping samples and scratching of the two DJs, Devastation and Michael K, it's a profound song. With everything that's been going on recently, it's still very relevant nearly 40 years later. You can hear the distinct funky Boston sound in the DJ's sampling. I think it's very interesting how early rap and hip hop didn't want to glorify these negative lifestyles. This trend changed in the 90s where rapping about dealing and violence became popular. It's just a complete 180 from where it started to the toxicity of some rap genres today. It seems like in the 80s rap was a ticket to get out of some of these terrible environments, not to glorify them. It's just interesting to me and something that I thought was worthy of note. Very few of the actual rappers from this time period spoke about the actual event on the street in details. It was later generations that started that trend. Rapping about dealing or committing violence would still have been taboo to a certain extent at this time. While I was digging, I was able to find an old interview online that the TDS Mob did on WERS's 88.9 Rap Explosion radio show in 1988. It's only like a little over 3 minutes long, but it's still gold. The TDS Mob only put out two 12-inch records, 1988's Crushing 'Em and 1989 What's This World Coming To. For whatever reason, they never made any more music as a group together. They started their own record label, Race Records, and on the 88.9 interview, they made it very clear that they weren't looking to sign with a major label, but they were trying to make Race Records a major label. Kool G would go on to make some music with the Almighty RSO, appearing on their hit album Doomsday, Forever RSO. Even with their short run, Kool G and the TDS Mob nonetheless earned their place in early Boston rap history. With his lyrics and style that were way ahead of his time and the masterful mixing, scratching, and sampling of the two DJs. It's also been said that the TDS Mob rocked Bruins gear before the Almighty RSO donned it on almost every album cover. Old heads also say the TDS Mob started the hockey jersey trend in hip-hop period, saying that no one else used to rock hockey jerseys before they did. College radio had a huge part in hip-hop's early days in the city of Boston. Without support from a large syndicated station, college radio is where a lot of early fans heard their favorite music. Even in the 90s when Jammin' 94.5 was around, I learned everything that I knew about underground rap or local Boston/Massachusetts artists from 88.9 at night WERS. When I first started listening to WERS around 95 or 96, it was on from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night. Reggae was on right before it, and I used to tune into that sometimes as well. But pre-internet, this was literally the only way a kid like me from the North Shore had any clue what was going on in the rap scene. Apparently before WERS, which was an Emerson College radio station, there was an MIT radio station that brought early rap to the hub. WMBR, or originally WTBS, was an MIT radio station out of Cambridge, and it presented a show called Lekos Lemma. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It was hosted by painter, DJ, and music fanatic Magnus Johnston. That show gave Boston rap fans a steady source of music, but it also gave local talent a platform to showcase their skills. Before Lekos Lemmas, WTBS had a show called The Ghetto. This show was before my time, and I'd honestly never heard of it before researching this video. If you look for it on YouTube, there's multiple obscure compilations that people have put together of old Lekos Lemma shows. I'm not sure if these were just the masters and they're unedited, or if they were broadcasted this way because they are raw and full of profanity. If they aired like that, that's amazing for the late 80s considering how censored everything was back then. The Lekos Lemma show was extremely important in the early days of rap in Boston. Not only was it the main source of rap for fans in the city, but it also showcased all types of talent, local, obscure, and well-known. An added bonus was that colleges like MIT had extra powerful antennas at their radio stations, allowing them to broadcast as far north as southern New Hampshire and as far south as Providence, Rhode Island. This allowed rap music to reach a wider and more diverse fan base. Guys like Magnus Johnstone did a lot for the early rap culture in the city, but have since been largely forgotten. Two groups that performed on the MIT radio show hosted by Magnus often were Edo G and the Bulldogs and the Almighty RSO. These were two of the more well-known groups to emerge from Boston during that time period. Edo G and the Bulldogs' song I Gotta Have It reached #1 on the Billboard's Top 100 Rap Songs in 1991. Possibly maybe not so well known is that Edo G was originally a beatboxer in a group called Fresh Face before becoming an MC. Another classic song by Edo G and the Bulldogs that I have to mention is one of my personal favorites, Love Comes and Goes. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that I dislike today's rap, that's not true, but it just doesn't have the same amount of soul or substance that stuff from that early era had. I wish YouTube wasn't so crazy with the copyright system so I could play some of this music for you that I'm talking about, but please go check it out for yourselves. First of all, it's tough not to listen to that song and to feel some type of emotional way, but you'll see also what I'm saying about the soul that Edo G and the Bulldogs music has. This leads me to one of rap's seminal groups in the mid to late 90s, Gang Starr. This group was made up of Guru, the self-proclaimed king of monotone for his laid-back rap style, and arguably one of the best DJs/producers in rap history, DJ Premier. Gang Starr has always been considered a New York group. Even in my comments, countless people argue with me that Gang Starr is from New York. Now, DJ Premier, as far as I know, is from New York City. Someone even told me that he's possibly originally from Houston, but I'm not so sure on that. But Guru, I'm sorry for the New Yorkers that are watching this, is not from New York. He's from Boston. Roxbury to be exact. I believe his dad was a minister, and Guru comes from a decent middle-class background. Also probably not so well known was that before he joined up with Premier, Guru, whose real name is Keith Elam, went by the name MC Keithy E and made a demo tape in 1986 under that name. He also performed on Lekos Lemma radio show under that moniker. Now, if Guru's early rap career as MC Keith E wasn't that well known, then I'm gonna also assume that not many people know he worked at the Roslindale DYS in the early 1980s. A longtime viewer and subscriber that I know simply as Kevin said that when he was a resident of Roslindale DYS, which is the Massachusetts equivalent of Juvenile Hall or the California Youth Authority, he saw a young Guru working there. Apparently, Guru had the unsavory job of putting especially disruptive residents into restraints. This was, of course, before he became a famous rap icon, but I found this personally very interesting. Gang Starr has always been one of my favorite rap groups, and I think that The Moment of Truth is one of the best rap albums of all time. I always heard that Guru was from Roxbury, even though Gang Starr was known as a New York group. Pre-internet, it was not as easy to get to the bottom of these type of situations. Now, if someone makes a claim, all you have to do is pull out your phone and Google it to see if it's credible or not. R.I.P. Guru, an absolute rap legend. Another local legend from that time period was a man named Rusty Pendleton, also known as Toe Jammer. He gained that name and notoriety because he spun records barefoot with his toes. Look closely if I can put the image up here. He's spinning the record with his bare feet. I've used this image in previous videos, but I didn't even realize it was a guy spinning records with his bare feet in the picture. Rusty would later own a record shop in Roxbury called Funky Fresh Records, and he's also the host of an internet radio show by the same name. One of the biggest groups to emerge from the Bean in the early 90s was another group that I said also performed on Lekos Lemma's radio show, the Almighty RSO. Honestly, if they hadn't been dropped by their record label Tommy Boy in 1992 after a controversy with One in the Chamber, they would have been much more well known outside of the Boston area, in my opinion. They were just about to have their big commercial break when the Boston Policemen's Association started protesting against Tommy Boy Records to drop the group from their label. The Policemen's Association claimed that the lyrics in the song incited violence against the police. RSO claimed they were just reporting on a situation of police brutality and their right to protect themselves. Tommy Boy didn't want to deal with the bad press, so they dropped the group and didn't promote their music. The group, which came together around 1985, lost early member Anthony Johnson from Corbett Street in Dorchester to violence in 1988. There have been different members throughout the years, but the main members were MCs Raymond Scott, aka Ray Dog, who later changed his name to Benzino, Marco Enos, who went by E Devious, Tony Rome, and DJ Def Jeff. I really can't hate on RSO or Benzino, regardless of how later in his career there was always rumors that he dissuaded lots of rap acts from performing in Boston or tried to strong arm other rappers. What other rumor, story, or what it may be, RSO used to make fire music. The album Doomsday Forever RSO is still an album 30 years later that you can bump all the way through without skipping one song. Besides the RSO's infamous One in the Chamber, there's classic tracks Bad Boys, Hellbound, the absolute banger with Mobb Deep, The War Is On. They even made one for the ladies with Biggie's BM Faith Evans called You Could Be My Boo. Not one of my personal picks. My personal favorite RSO song is He's Gonna Catch It. The almighty RSO's music from the early 90s is classic, top-tier, hardcore East Coast rap. And the fact that they were producing this music in the late 80s and early 90s before the more well-known New York acts like Big L, Mobb Deep, Biggie, and Nas makes you wonder how much this Boston group influenced future East Coast rappers. Whether or not people outside of Boston are aware of the impact that RSO had on the rap game as a whole, in the hub they are considered rap royalty. People rarely will talk about Boston rap without mentioning RSO, Benzino, or his future rap group Made Men, which I discussed in my Paul Pierce video. RSO was a regular on Lekos Lemma's show as well, even winning the Beattown Rap Battle contest on the show. Another college radio show that was bringing rap music to fans in the city and also giving a platform to local artists was a Harvard radio station program called The Street Beat. This honestly is quite amazing for the time. Not only was there one underground radio program in the city making rap music available, but at one point there was multiple stations. I think it's easy during these particular days and times of internet and incredible amounts of information everywhere you turn to downplay this, but back in the late 80s it was completely different. If these underground radio stations hadn't existed and made the effort to foster this new music movement, there might not have been any rap culture in Boston whatsoever. The importance of these radio stations in Boston's early stages of rap are monumental, but the importance would go beyond Boston rap, because the hosts of Street Beat, two Harvard students, John Schechter and David Mays, in 1988 teamed up with RSO's DJ Def Jeff and launched the Source magazine out of their college dorm room. The Source magazine throughout the 1990s and a large part of the early 2000s was the preeminent rap publication. The The source would rate different projects with their mic system of points, and this is how a large part of the rap audience got their information. It also drove large parts of rap industry's consumerism. If the source gave an album a high rating, it was more likely to do well in sales. In later years, the source has lost a lot of their credibility for various reasons, and it's something I could probably do a video on by itself, but it's very important to note in the origin stories of Boston rap that rap's biggest publication for decades was created in Boston. Well, Cambridge technically. Just don't tell Millies. That's another thing about the early days of rap. There was no SoundCloud, YouTube, or Apple Music. You couldn't download music off the web. There wasn't any web. And there weren't giant conglomerate stores like Walmart to purchase your music at. You had to go to specific places to get your music. Some old notable record stores that carried hip hop in the early days were Skippy White's, A Nubian Notion, Funky Fresh Records, and of course the good old Tower Records and Strawberries. Strawberries was my personal favorite record store. Love me some Strawberries. Another huge part of Boston's urban and hip hop culture is the city's love for Adidas. Run DMC first made Adidas a pop culture phenomenon inside hip hop with their smash hit My Adidas. For a short time, everyone across the United States was rocking the three stripes, but long after the fad had passed nationally, it stuck in Boston. I have to mention that back in the 70s, Detroit guys used to rock the Adidas top 10s well before Run DMC, but again, it didn't take hold like in Boston. Boston guys have always identified with Adidas brand, even going so far as to throw up three fingers and say threes and B's, or I've heard other people say three for the stripes or three for the bean. It was also a Boston tradition to have Adidas trees in their hoods. Adidas trees are where people would throw sneakers, mostly Adidas, some donated, some taken, up into trees. I thought this was specific only to Intervale Street, but since I made that video, many viewers have informed me that there are multiple Adidas trees throughout Boston hoods. That's definitely a Boston tradition. Correct me if I'm wrong, I've never heard of any other city doing that. In the late 80s and early 90s, when different crews in Boston identified themselves with different sports teams' apparel, Adidas always was a universal fashion throughout the city that was relatively safe to wear during a very dangerous time. It also signified when going out of town that you were from Boston. People from surrounding cities like New York who favored Nikes would recognize someone from Boston by them being all decked out in Adidas. Like hip-hop records not being widely available in the 1980s, it was the same for hip-hop fashions. There were only a few stores in the city that sold the latest Adidas. There was Mickey Finn's at Downtown Crossing, Boston's famous shopping area off the Commons. Alpha Omega was in Roxbury. There was Harry the Greek's in the South End, which was a much different neighborhood pre-gentrification, and for all the kids in Southie, there was Jonesy's. You simply cannot talk about Boston's hip-hop culture without discussing the brand Adidas. The two go hand in hand. I personally have 4 pairs of Adidas sneakers, a tracksuit, and like 3 or 4 hats in my closet. Just saying. I don't have any Nikes either, and that's not just because I'm cheap. Another important piece of early hip-hop culture in the city of Boston was the bi-weekly local cable access show called Strictly Hip Hop. It was hosted by MC Spice, which was the first rapper to be signed to Atlantic Records, by the way. The cameraman, Al McFarlane, got the gig by responding to an ad in the newspaper to become a TV producer for $15. The class was held at a South End tenement building. When Def Jam heard about the local show, they started feeding them promotional videos for Def Jam artists, and that helped the show's popularity. Al McFarlane would later work for the post office and still is in possession of boxes with over 30 years of hip-hop underground music from the show. Through McFarlane's connections to Def Jam and artists, he was instrumental in getting Slick Rick to perform at Madison Park High School in the late 80s. Can you imagine seeing Slick Rick perform back then at a local high school? That must have been sick. I personally love Slick Rick. If you guys haven't heard some of his later collaborations with artists like Outkast in the early 2000s and you're only familiar with his earlier work, go check those out. Like I already said, most of the stuff I'm discussing was before my time, and I really didn't know much about it until I started researching this video for my buddy Hassan, who requested it. My hope is that it brought up some nostalgia for you guys that were around during that time period, and for the younger guys, maybe a lot of this was educational for you and gave you a better understanding of the early days of Boston rap. I never personally listened to the MIT or Harvard channels, but I was a die-hard fan of WERS at night. Starting around 7th grade, I would listen to the show every night, and more often than not, I would record the shows on a tape cassette to listen to at a future time. That show introduced me to all types of rap from Boston and beyond that I would never have heard of otherwise. I remember before anyone knew who DMX was, they played Get At Me Dog on WERS, and I was like, what was that? I had never heard anything like that in my life. I found a lot of New York rappers before they got big on WARS, like DMX and also the Locks, Capone and Noriega, MOP, and Big L, for example. But as far as Boston artists, I found most of them on WERS as well. Some of my personal favorites from that era that I found through 88.9 at night were Boston's Mr. Liff and Dorchester's Acrobatic. Acrobatic, besides being a dope MC, supposedly gave a woman named Cindy Diggs her nickname of Mother Hip Hop. Apparently, back in the day when it was hard for rap acts to book venues, Mother Hip Hop, aka Cindy Diggs, would work her magic. With her connections as a black social organizer, she helped early hip hop groups find venues. She even went so far as to make recorded messages with details of hip hop shows, how to buy tickets, and to attend. So, with that kind of support, I would find it hard not to mention Cindy Diggs, aka Mother Hip Hop, in this video. Round of applause, please. One last shout out to my WERS days are Esoteric and his DJ 7L, who in my opinion is an incredibly underrated rap producer. They had great collaborations with other indie rap groups Jedi Mind Tricks and the rapper Virtuoso. Esoteric, even though is considered a Boston rapper, he is from the North Shore city of Beverly. His mom used to be my teacher, so I know. So, in my opinion, it's ridiculous to say that Boston didn't contribute to the overall history of rap or that the city doesn't have its own distinct hip hop culture. Another important part of the early culture that I didn't really get to discuss in this video was breakdancing crews and graffiti artists. They were also fundamental aspects of the early hip hop culture. In my research, I found the name of two b-boy crews, the Rockers and the Floor Lords. I'm limited with the time in making these videos. Maybe in future I can go into further detail about famous Boston graffiti artists and breakdancing crews, but for the most part I focused on the music for this video. So not only did Boston have 3 underground rap radio shows and a bi-weekly cable access show, but the most important rap publication, The Source, was started in the Boston area. Obviously, Boston had a significant impact in the early hip hop movement, more so than people in the nearby city of New York would like to admit. Just listen to the RSO album, Doomsday, Forever RSO. You can clearly see where a lot of later East Coast rappers get their style from. So from the very early days of Boston's funky club music to the early rap groups like TDS Mob, the Lennox Project's Cool G, the Billboard charting Edo G and the Bulldogs, the infamous Raid Dog aka Benzino and his early group, which really should have been a supergroup if Tommy Boy didn't drop them, the Almighty RSO, and the seminal rap group Gang Starr. Boston rap's early days should be part of rap's overall origin story, but for some reason it's not. Just like I mentioned in previous videos, people have an idea of what they think Boston is or was, and they don't necessarily want the truth to change the image that they have in their minds. But to the people that know the truth of Boston's hip hop and urban culture, it has been around for almost 50 years, and even with gentrification looking to change every neighborhood in the city, Boston's hip hop culture, although fragmented, is still hanging tough. Again, shout out to Hassan Burton for requesting this video, and to all my viewers and subscribers who contribute to this channel in the comments, thank you very much. Before I end, a quick shout out to Dart Adams, who's a wealth of local knowledge on this subject as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video about the early days of Boston rap. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Let me know for further content if there's any particular rappers you'd like to see me cover or any particular time periods or stories. I'm planning on putting out some content soon about some of my favorite current Boston and Massachusetts rappers. Like always, if you're not familiar with any of these rappers I spoke about, go check out their music. And like I said, there's old mixtapes of Lekos Lemma's radio show from the 1980s on YouTube. And don't forget to always support local Boston and Massachusetts artists. But most of all, guys, make good choices, make good decisions, take care of your family, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a good day. I'll talk to you guys soon. God bless.